Hello and welcome to another fantastic panel at the It's Time event. And I do indeed think it is time. It is time that we have these conversations and time that we take action together and do something about these challenges that we all face collectively. My name's Robert Belgrave. By day, I'm the CEO of a tech company called Wirehive. And by night, my pro bono project, which I'm extremely proud of, is I'm one of the co-founding team at Ecologi. If you don't know about Ecologi, we're the crew behind this event. We created a platform about 18 months ago to help people take control of their impact on the climate through reforestation and carbon credits, both for individuals and for businesses. And we've been humbled, frankly, by the response that we've had and the growth that we've seen. At time of speaking to you today, we've planted 4 million trees and it's growing every day, which is fantastic. For me, this is a really personal cause. I think that I'm a dyslexic, I'm a creative, I really connect with visuals more than I do with text and with data. And I think that storytelling and the kind of narrative around the challenge of climate change is so important, and using creativity to bring that to life and to communicate that as effectively as possible really is the difference between enticing a whole new generation of people to care about this topic and frankly letting it pass them by. So I'm very honored to be hosting this panel today. We've got an amazing group of guests who I'll introduce now. And we're going to talk through some of the key themes around this topic of how do you communicate, these challenges? What are the stories you can tell? How can you bring them to life? And what are the things that really matter in that regard? So without any further ado, allow me to begin by introducing Andrew Metthurst. Have a little wave, Andrew, to our lovely viewers. Andrew is the CFO of Extinction Rebellion, which strikes me as a very interesting role because Extinction Rebellion, I'm imagining, don't have loads of money, but maybe they do. Who knows? Maybe they have ever more money by the day as people start to care about these things. Andrew, tell us one thing about your role at Extinction Rebellion. What do you do every day?
Well, I mean, last year we raised about £3.5 million, so not bad for a ragtag group of activists. I mean, we have amazing effect. But CFO is probably exaggerating things a little bit. But essentially, I lead the team that effectively takes the donations from various people and makes sure they get to where they need to be across the movement. So it's really as simple as that.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. I won't tease you about the BBC article that comes up if you Google your name. But hey, people could go and do that if they want to.
You do realise everyone's going to be Googling my name.
I do realise that, yes. But may I say your daughter looks charming in that lovely photo of you with her on the front page of that BBC article, and a very good article too.
I mean, the story is that somehow I left this well-paid job in the city and just started running around and getting arrested on the streets of London. That's the story. And there's an open invitation to anybody else of my former colleagues in the city who want to follow me.
Well, let's hope some of them are watching today, and we'll take you up on that. And I'm going to come back to that because I really want to hear a bit more about that what snared you and led you down that path. So our next guest is Paula. Paula, I'm going to do a terrible job of pronouncing your surname, so I'm going to let you pronounce it. But Paula joins us from Green is the New Black. Say hello, Paula. Tell us how to pronounce your surname and tell us a bit about what you do every day.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Paula Michelis. It's not that hard. So I'm French and I've been living for 7 years in Asia, where I co-founded Green is the New Black, and we are a media platform promoting conscious living, and we do it through 3 different legs. Actually, we have a content online magazine where we provide resources to people and to organizations to live more consciously. We have the Conscious Festival, and we have a marketplace selling conscious brands in fashion, beauty, lifestyle, and food.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much for joining us, and really interested to hear a bit more about that through the session. Next up, we have Carrie Hutchinson from The Lonely Whale, and Carrie joined us from America today. America, as we all know, has had a very interesting couple of weeks, so we appreciate Carrie putting down the bottle of gin or whatever other crutch she has been using to deal with the chaos in her world and join us today. Say hello, Carrie. Tell us a bit about what you do.
Hi, I'm Carrie Hutchison. I work with Lonely Whale, managing their marketing communications brand, and very excited to be here with you. We make conservation personal. We really want people to love the ocean And we take lessons from major brands and how they speak to consumers. We want to meet people where they are and kind of make it fun and cool. So we've done some really major campaigns around straws, plastic water bottles. We are aiming to reach 100,000 youth through our Ocean Heroes program, which trains youth on how to run their own campaigns in their own communities against plastic. We also work with corporations on looking at the supply chain through our Next Wave Plastics initiative. And we recently launched a podcast. So very excited about that.
I can subscribe. Where would people find that podcast?
On any major platform, Spotify, Apple.
Is it called Lonely Whale or something else?
Yeah, it's called 52 Hertz, which is the frequency that the lonely whale were named after, called out at. There's the legend of the lonely whale, which called out at a frequency way out of range for blue whales, which usually maxes out around 40 hertz. So he was calling in the darkness of the ocean. And we were inspired by that because I think a lot of us in the environmental space feel like we're screaming and no one's listening. So we wanted people to feel like they were part of something. They weren't the lonely whale, but we were inspired by him.
And there's a great example of some creative storytelling right there. And last but by no means least, when I'm introduced last, I like to say I am headlining the panel, which is a joke that always seems to get a laugh with the live audience. Won't quite have the same impact today. Matthew, say hello. Matthew's from Energy Systems Catapult. Tell us a bit about what you do.
Hey, and nice to meet everybody. Yeah, so I work at the Catapult, which is a not-for-profit government-backed accelerator for low carbon innovations, and I work with a bunch of other people helping others bring their ideas and test and build their ideas, their low carbon ideas. So get feedback from people on their ideas and then help them kind of refine, improve, test them in the real world and make them kind of fly. And that's what we do. And it's been really interesting to hear from the other panelists. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great stuff, great stuff. So look, we could do this for hours. Unfortunately, we've only got about 30 minutes today to get through a really deep and nuanced topic. So let's just dive straight in. We'll come back to Andrew to begin. And I think the question I want to ask is there a strong memory you have of what led you to connect with the cause that you're now part of every day? Was there a key message? Was it an Attenborough documentary? Was it something a journalist wrote? Was it something you saw in the wild yourself? Was it the birth of a child? What was that moment for you that sort of led you into this world? And Andrew, obviously you had that big, quite well-published moment of leaving the city, as you alluded to. Maybe there was something associated with that. I don't know. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I openly admit I'm sort of late to the party in terms of environmentalism and climate change and activism in that sense. But your digital footprint allows you to sort of check back to where you were at various times in the last 5-10 years. And I was on a bit of a sabbatical between jobs, and I was just blogging, right? And I was following this book called 365 Ways to Change the World, right? It was a silly little book and lots of different ideas in there. There was one post in February 2015 when I would write something, I'd read something, I'd write something, and I was basically just putting it out there. And I started to apologize to my hypothetical grandchildren, because my kids were 15 and 20. And I remember the picture on this blog post was Earthrise that they took when from one of the Apollo missions. And I was that was the point I got it. And I realized that from an environmental point of view, there was a very, very scary world ahead. I still went back to do my job. And then fast forward 3 years, 2018 was the big year for me. The heat of the summer, reading a paper called Deep Adaptation by a guy called Professor Jem Bendell. And of course, the IPCC's 1.5 degree report. Those sort of three things came in 2018, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. But 2015 was the sort of, I got it, still went back to work and was doing stuff. But then 2018, it just hit me, and it was a combination of those three things.
Interesting. And so quite data driven then, your connection, it sounds like, you know, some quite sort of almost academic detail in the stuff that really snared you. It wasn't so much a creative message perhaps that led you down the path.
Joining the dots is really, really difficult. You see the
sure.
story about declining species on The Guardian, you read watch a David Attenborough documentary, but it's now become this sort of holistic view, but it's still difficult. It's one of the reasons why in Extinction Rebellion we say tell the truth. We don't believe the dots are being joined. So people understand some of it, but they're not really understanding the whole picture and the emergency situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and fascinating, and definitely something to maybe touch on some more if we find the time. Paula, from your perspective, you know, the whole world of fashion and is perhaps not one that until recently has been seen to really participate all that often in these types of causes. You know, fast fashion obviously has become a massive trend over the last decade, which has a whole load of its own challenges. What's your journey? Was there a thing that happened in your life that led you down this path? Was it a creative thing? Was it more of an accumulation? Tell us a bit about your journey.
Yes, it's been, I think, a combination of both, because I grew up wanting to become a businesswoman. I think I was really attracted by what society had portrayed as success. So I was dreaming about, you know, big bucks, big contract. As a woman, I wanted to have my suit. And so I studied in the best business school in Paris, started my career in an investment bank. And I lasted for a year because I had a huge depression. I just was not fulfilling you know, my purpose, and I just lost completely my mind, and I had to just slow down. So I just picked up a second master's. This is what brought me to Asia, and I discovered the concept of social entrepreneurship. So for me, it was revolutionary at the time because I understood it was possible to grow a profitable organization while having an impact. I'm not sure if it's true, you know, like a few years later, but at the time I just found it really fascinating, and I was inspired by people like Paul Polman, you know, the former CEO at Unilever, who was saying stuff like you could do good by doing well, and I was like, okay, wow, that's just amazing. So I joined a social enterprise in Singapore, and that led me to work with National Geographic, and I watched Chasing Ice. I don't know if you guys watched this documentary. It's a 2012 documentary, and he portrays the story of a videographer, James Balog, who decided to go in the Arctic Circle to put some camera traps everywhere to just take time-lapse photography of glaciers melting in a real time. And it was the first time that someone visually created a video about, you know, the glaciers over 3 years melting. And it was the first time scientists, you know, who had research about that had the visual evidence that it was happening. And this documentary is just amazing. And that really led me to focus more on climate change after that.
Perfect. Great. So for you, you know, a number of things, of course, led you there, but that creative memory is of that documentary and how powerful it was and how it resonated with you. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that with us. Carrie, coming to you, what was your perspective? Was there a moment or an accumulation? And tell us your story there.
Well, I have to agree with what Andrew and Paula said about, first of all, I used to work at National Geographic and have gotten to meet Bob Ballard a few times, and he is so much fun, such an interesting person. And David Attenborough's recent documentary on Netflix is incredibly powerful. It's very personal. He talks about it as a testament. His witness statement, he calls it. It's really, really incredible. And I think the personal part of it, how he weaves his life story in, is just amazing. But my first kind of memory of environmental influences, I was raised by two school teachers, public school teachers, and my they're retired now, but he's a science teacher for 30 plus years. And I remember going to McDonald's with him as a kid, and he would always get his soda without a straw and without a lid because it was extra waste. So he was kind of on the strawless bandwagon in the 80s, way before our strawless campaign at Lonely Whale. But because they didn't work during the summers, we would go camping and spend a lot of outdoor time. And one summer when I was 12, we traveled across the US. We camped at national parks. You know, as a 12-year-old, I got to see so much natural beauty in this country, and just also exposure to different kinds of people. Even though we're one country, we're really different, as evidenced by our recent election. So I think it was just sort of, like you said, an accumulation. And then, you know, as I entered my 20s, I bopped around the business world for a while, but really found my footing when I started to work for nonprofits. And then when I was working at National Geographic, that really sealed the deal for me. You know, the imagery that comes out of there is so powerful, and that's how you move people. Yeah,
well, that's two shout outs to National Geographic's amazing videography and photography, and I love the story about your dad and the cup and the straw. That's so personal, and I mean, that's a campaign in itself, right? You could even use that story and bring that to life. Matthew, how about you?
I'm just reflecting on what I'm hearing from others as well. It's this drip kind of consciousness, in a way, that resonates for me. It wasn't a light bulb moment. It was a more of a gentle kind of drip. And but then as people speak, I'm remembering other things that I had forgotten before. So one was I worked as a ski bum, so it wasn't a business big shot. I was just cleaning toilets and, you know, surfing the snow. And I remember the guy I'd gone over with, his brother came and he played this CD that none of us had heard before, which was Marvin Gaye. And Mercy, Mercy Me came on, and I remember the song talking about fish full of mercury and other environmental kind of issues. And I just remember thinking, this is a brilliant CD, amazing artist, but also the lyrics really resonating. And then I'm looking out of the window and seeing the snow and thinking, is there always going to be snow on mountains? And then going home and seeing people with these machines blowing leaves. I think they were maybe diesel powered. And I was just thinking, what we use it with burning oil to blow leaves. It just seems nuts. This just seemed completely, felt like I was looking at some history, even though it was kind of live in front of me. And I remember sort of seeing some films, Inconvenient Truth, and there's some other like similar films. But it was a drip. And then I was working for Orange at the time doing telecom stuff. And I just thought, in the end, who cares about phones? Didn't matter. But I really struggled. I imagine lots of people are in this state where they kind of care, but it's a difficult thing to kind of change. And my partner at the time, who is now my wife, kind of said, you know, just do what you want to do. Start mucking around. So I quit my job and I retrained in environment stuff and then got various jobs. But it was a gentle drip, Robert.
Yeah, it's but you've cited music as well, which hasn't come up yet in today's conversation, and I think that's you know, another, of course, one of the core creative disciplines, right? And audio and music, and really interesting to hear that those lyrics resonated with you. And I think you've captured something in that story which I think is really important, which is often it's about the stars aligning, and you know, the snow, something you clearly were so fond of. I love snow in the mountains as well, and so, you know, that plus the song and the circumstance, and it all has to kind of come together sometimes, doesn't it, for that penny to drop for people. So thank you all for sharing those stories, and you know, some of that stuff's quite personal. I think where I'd like to go next is to come back to Andrew and to talk a bit about the kind of the story of climate change generally, and just framing it, because I think you know, you alluded to this about how, you know, how XR is perceived, and that, you know, if for people who haven't joined the dots up, they see you know, you guys blocking bridges in London and think you're terrorists, right? Like they just can't, there's no context for why you're doing that and why you're so like wound up by it, right? And to characterize you as the organization, I appreciate everyone has different perspectives within it. So how do you think we go about framing this challenge? That clearly the five of us, the good news is the five of us here see this the same way. From the limited pieces of data we've shared, we all seem to agree there is something that needs action. What's your perspective, Andrew, on how to approach it? And I'm sorry to do this, Andrew. You're muted, buddy.
Sorry, I have dogs, so they may bark, and that's why when I'm not talking.
We appreciate it. Don't worry.
So Matthew's just talked about music, and so it's reminded me of a song that is in the end credits of the sequel to Inconvenient Truth. And I think Melissa Etheridge wrote it. We need to wake up. Right. And so that really resonates for me. So I think a lot of people get it. It's a serious problem. But the problem is the policymakers, the politicians appearing to continue with business as usual is sending a mixed message, perhaps a message that's almost drowning out this problem. So we hear it's a problem, then we turn the newspaper and then they're advertising £5 budget flights to Barcelona for the weekend or whatever. And this is mixed messaging. So for me, the story of climate change is a lack of action in the 30 years that we have got it. And when I say we got it, the United Nations created the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 30 years ago in 1990. Or 1989, but we've got it for 30 years. And in that 30 years, carbon emissions have increased by 60%. So if that's not a definition of failure, I don't know what is. And Extinction Rebellion exists because of all the wonderful, despite the wonderful attempts by certain NGOs and organizations, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, to tell this message, something has failed badly because, so trying to continue to do the same thing just because things have got a little bit more, a lot more serious, is clearly wrong. So that's why Extinction Rebellion are coming out with non-violent civil disobedience, exactly like Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement of the 60s, exactly like Gandhi trying to get independence for India from the British. Non-violent civil disobedience has worked in the past. This is an emergency. That's the story. We need to wake up. This is an emergency. And if we don't act like it's an emergency, then we're not reinforcing the message of those that haven't yet joined the dots or haven't yet got it. Mm-hmm. It's a serious problem that's not only going to affect people in the global south as it is currently, but my children, my grandchildren, if I ever have them, this is now. This is, business as usual is no longer an option. We don't have a choice of dealing with the climate, because if we don't deal with the climate, business as usual doesn't carry on. Business as usual is going to be massively disrupted.
And I think, the emergency is a very difficult way to frame something because people don't like emergencies, right? Unfortunately, human nature is to resist accepting something is that pressing or that urgent, because emergencies in life are associated with pain and suffering and all those kind of negative emotions and connotations. And I mean, Paula, come to you, like, so hard to talk about emergency in your creative messaging with a kind of fashion and lifestyle business, right? I mean, how do you position why you participate in the things you do with your business and how you interact with your customers?
It's really interesting, just because I do feel that over time, with our little experience, we believe that there is no one campaign which fits all, and you need to adapt your message to your audiences. And I think the emergency, messaging is like so needed, but we chose with Green is the New Black to make it so as, it's more positive. So we appeal more on positive, emotions, yeah, on pride, optimism, because we know it works better for our audience, which is, starting to wake up, and we just don't want to shock them too much. So I think there's like common errors in communications. And one of them is the fact that if people know, they will change. So as much as raising awareness is key and necessary, it's not sufficient to trigger behavior change. And we are seeing it with, major campaigns in plastic, major campaigns also around climate change. And we see little changes because people, they want things which are convenient. They want to see the practicability about, what they do. So again, we chose to, make it so as it's digestible, accessible, and there is always a call to action, which is what we called little green steps. So these baby steps, yet important, steady to go somewhere else, and to create systemic changes. We believe in that, but our work is not sufficient. So that's why we also love Extinction Rebellion, other NGOs, because we work hand in hand with them. And we need to embrace complexity. We need to embrace the fact that, there is no one message which fits all.
Yeah, that's good. It's great insight. And about that, while there is clearly an emergency, maybe that's not always the right message for every audience, I guess, is to sort of to round up some of that thinking. Carrie, it sounds like you have a really interesting perspective on this, and we've got very European-centric view on the rest of the panel here. What's your perspective on this, maybe with a bit of an American slant?
Yeah, again, just going back to our recent election, a lot of people said they voted because of the economy, which again doesn't totally make sense to me. But I think that we need to do some reframing around the economic impact. There's an author, Emily Atkin. She has this amazing newsletter called Heated. And she did an analysis after our last presidential debate with 30 major media outlets. Very few of them talked about the cost of inaction. And I think that a lot of Americans, at least, see it as a sacrifice. And we need to reframe it as something that is not a sacrifice, it's protection. We've been talking about biodiversity a lot at Lonely Whale, and nature will be fine, but we won't. We really need to kind of appeal to that selfish nature, but also the economic one. And I think being really specific about what people can and can't do. I think that's why our Australis campaign was so successful. We took one thing and focused incredibly hard on it. At the same time, a new research study came out of the University of Georgia here saying that people really push back when you tell them what to do. They don't like to be told. At Lonely Whale, we like to say people don't like to be should upon. So I think making it a little bit more inclusive, more solution oriented, and really talking about how much more prosperity we could have if we take these steps, I think could be a really powerful way to come at the problem. And we really need to encourage journalists to tell the story, I think, in a different way. In the US, I feel like there's often this, framing of, well, if climate change is real, and it's madness, it's of course real.
Yeah.
I've been spending a lot of time studying the enemies. And there's a great BBC podcast called How They Made Us Doubt Everything, which is a really fascinating study in how this has all been framed. And they looked at how big tobacco made people doubt that tobacco causes cancer. And the big oil industry took that playbook and ran with it to cast doubt about climate change. And they did so by getting scientists on their side, scientists who are willing to compromise their integrity, but that hasn't really mattered. So I think, here we keep debating about whether it's real or not. We just need to shut that down. And I think that that's been a really big challenge and a really big problem with especially the last 4 years.
Yeah. God, there's another panel on what is truth, post-truth, weaponizing technology. I mean, that's kind of my day-to-day world. So I'm going to swerve away from that particular topic, but I think totally agree with everything you've said, and really interesting positioning about make requests, don't give people orders. There's a discipline called nonviolent communication, which is all about every human communication is characterized in two ways. In MVC, you're a jackal or a giraffe. A jackal is to give an order, to make a demand. A giraffe is empathetic and makes a considered request. And the same question asked to the same person in both of those voices will literally get a yes or a no. So it's incredibly powerful, that skill in how you nuance communication to make sure you're never ordering somebody to do something. So great insight. And Matt, last but by no means least, again, what's your perspective on the framing of climate change and how to tell that story?
It's just so interesting hearing from the others, I have to say. So there's a few things that struck me. So one is on the clothing side of things. Really interesting lesson I learned from recycling, which is that the behavior changes the attitude, not the other way around. When people are forced to recycle, otherwise nobody collects their trash or their waste in the UK, you know, they kind of start talking about pro-environmental values, which they didn't have when you asked them about it before they had to recycle, which is really powerful in terms of like how do you start making changes. And I guess that I was inspired recently. I heard a story about the ozone, which is on a really great podcast called Slow News, which is about the story of how we filled the hole in the ozone. And I guess the nub of that really resonated with me because that's kind of my view on the bit I'm trying to do, which is that if we can make low carbon as good as, or ideally kind of better than what we've already got, then it just becomes the natural choice. People prefer it, so they do it. And that's not to, I'm a massive fan of XR. I'm one of your funders. I mean, it's not vast funding, but I'm a huge fan. But it sort of takes all sorts. So my angle is that, you know, kind of make things as good as or better, make low carbon as good as or better. And that I think enables us to have a virtuous circle, which is how they filled the ozone hole, whereby people, consumers, citizens kind of prefer the low carbon thing anyway. So they're buying more, you know, maybe of low carbon clothes or, you know, more sustainable clothing, which means businesses are kind of keen on it as well, because people can kind of make a living. And that means both voters and businesses are kind of lobbying government to make change, to introduce policies that kind of save the planet too. So it's this trying to create a virtuous circle where everyone wins, and it's really hard to find those, but they're very powerful when you can. So that's kind of my angle.
Yeah, it's God, what a group we've got today. I'm so devastatingly disappointed that I'm almost at the point where I have to start trying to wrap this up. Andrew, go on. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to come in and say, so there's a great video on YouTube by a lady called Jane Morton, who's Australian, called Emergency Mode Messaging, and how it works, right? I mean, we all think of cigarette packets and, you know, nasty pictures on cigarette packets. So from that point of view, you know, it does work. And yes, there's a real challenge about telling people what to do. But if you're in an emergency situation, wartime, if we think about rationing, right, the problem is you put 10 cents on fuel and it hurts the poorest people, whereas the rich, you know, they don't mind, sort of thing. So from that point of view, it's why we in Extinction Rebellion say we have a problem here. It needs massive fundamental changes in our society, but let's open it up to citizens assemblies selected by something called sortition. So they are fully reflective of the populations. And if everyone's involved in the decisions and the sacrifices that we're going to need to make to resolve this problem, they feel it's fairer. So I absolutely hear Carrie's point about when people are told this is what you're going to have to swallow, they just don't think it's fair. In wartime, when everyone got 2 eggs rationing, everyone thought it was fair.
Yeah, and it's, you know, unfortunately, and I think this is starting to change. You know, I look at the people signing up to Ecologi and the feedback we get, and just my own bubble, it seems like people may start to see the bombs flying a little bit, you know, like, oh, we're being shot at. Maybe this is an emergency, you know, whereas in war, obviously, it was so obvious to everybody that there was a problem. It seems to me like in some small way, at least in the UK, people are starting to realize that maybe this is a true crisis and a real emergency. And I think that's such a good point, Andrew, about, well, you know what, when people realize if people realize that's the situation, they want to be told what to do, and they're more than happy to be given an order, right? Tell me how to save myself. How do we solve this problem? You know, just tell me what to do. It sort of almost completely flips in that mode of thinking. But if you can't get people there, then it falls flat. And so maybe we've unearthed the biggest challenge there is today in communicating this issue, frankly, which is and I think as Paula said, you can't tell the same story to everyone in the audience. And if somebody already understands this is an emergency, then you can absolutely go hard with direct, blunt, orders, frankly. However, if perhaps you're dealing with people who aren't in that space yet mentally for all kinds of reasons, because they've been led astray by the nefarious tricks of big oil, or because in the paper, as Andrew started off by alluding to, it still seems like it's just a kind of another page of an ongoing thing, and it's not really that big a deal. Like, if someone's in that headspace, an order maybe just doesn't resonate, and so you need to start to coerce them a bit more gently. And so clearly all these different modes have a place and are all critical. Andrew, go on.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry, I don't want to do this.
No, go on.
COVID has been a really interesting story. What I try and say in my speech or my talk to the conference is the system's broken, right? And it manifests itself in many different ways. For some people, it manifests itself in poverty and food banks, and in other people, racism. It's not just a climate and ecological emergency. And so the stories are different, and the people are going to be most focused on the impact of that system on them. So I think the system is broken, and the climate and ecological emergency is one of the biggest symptoms of that system.
I think we might have to end on that point. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I'm going to have to go against my instinct to ask you all 20 more questions and be a good panel host. Matt wants to add one more thing. Don't worry, I'm going to say, what's your final thought to everybody? So Matt, go next. What's your final thought? No, go on.
I'll open with my final, and I guess you go to the others. Because I don't know, I think probably all of us maybe vacillate between hope and despair. And the thing that keeps me hopeful is that there is a gradual awakening. I don't think we can wait for the consequences of climate change before we act, because there's a 20-year lag in the system. So I don't think that's going to, but I do see a gradual awakening, and just meeting all of you today has been brilliant for me. And for me, I think that over the next 20, my lifespan, it'll be the relationships I make, the relationships I build, and we can get through this together. We're capable of incredible things, and we've seen that with COVID, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So I guess I'm hopeful, because there are a lot more people becoming aware and awake, and reaching out to one another, and together we can do this. We can do this.
And a nice message of hope there. I hope you're right, is all I'll say on that. Carrie, any final thoughts? Anything to round off?
Yeah, building on that, one of the best parts of my job is when I get to talk to the ocean heroes directly. I mean, these kids are incredible. They know so much. They're so aware. And even my daughter, she participated too. We were in a convenience store this summer, and she wouldn't get a drink because they only came in plastic bottles. I mean, that's the reason we all wear seatbelts, is because they campaign toward kids, and now the kids know what's going on. And I think they're also getting the sense that they're going to have to deal with a lot of it. So they want to take action, and we're trying to encourage them and say, your age isn't an issue. You can go do this. I was on the phone with a brother and sister in Kenya who participated in we had to move our Ocean Heroes boot camp to virtual format this year. And they've done incredible things in their community. I mean, they have, elders in the community running around telling people to put those plastic bottles away. And they're amazing. They have so much energy and passion, and they just, this stuff is heavy. Thank God for them, that I can talk to them and get some energy to get through it. We do need to connect to each other. These are not, distinct crises, right? Racism is intertwined with the environmental crisis. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, but also to make these connecting points, I think, as Andrew said, is really important. It's the systems. We have very broken systems that we need to fix, and we need to get motivated to do that. but our youth really are. So that gives me some hope too.
Another magnificent message of hope for the future. I just hope I hope there's something left for them when they inherit it. Paula, final word for you on this amazing panel. What do you think?
Yes, I always love to share about the fact that sustainability is a journey also that starts from within. And I think there's a strong connection between the relationship we have with ourselves and the relationship we have with the rest of the world. So, this, greed or need for accumulation of wealth, of resources, of things, I think comes from, our inner kind of relationship with us, and ultimately with, the fear of not being loved enough, of not having enough. So I think, deep inside, it's good to just research from within what's going on. So that's the first point. The second point is the fact that I think we have the tendency, once we realize suddenly what's going on with the world, to just be really angry and to want everyone around us to know about what they should be doing. And, I became vegetarian 7 years ago, and then suddenly I wanted everyone to become a vegan around me. And I was telling my boyfriend, my mother, and I was like super angry. And this is not the point. The point is not that everybody, 100% of the people should be perfect about what they do. The point is like everyone should be aware and start doing some things. And we should be just really supportive instead of, in our field of sustainability, trying to just put everybody down, because this is happening also in our group, in our community. So we need to be strong together. We need to, celebrate even the small actions, because this can lead to systemic changes.
I totally agree. And I think just to round it all off and kind of encapsulate all of that, my greatest hope is that people will at least understand the choices they make, even if those choices are not to change. I just hope we can at least get to a consensus globally on what it means if you eat beef every day. So, that's your choice. That's fine. We live in a free world, but don't be misled about what the impact of that is. For example, to focus on the diet issue, or any, flying every day, or using a petrol car, or whatever that thing might be. I just hope we can at least reach consensus on what the truth is about the impact at some point in the not too distant future. Guys, thank you so much for your time, for your contribution, for the work you do every day, participating in this cause. Let's wave goodbye to our lovely viewers and hand over back to our fantastic hosts. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you all.